used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms. He used to tell people with pride in his little voice, "That's my sister. She takes care of me." I held onto that voice for years, even after it changed, even after I raised my younger brother. Then he pretended he didn't know me. I was 17 years old the night I became a mother without ever having a child of my own. My parents died in a car accident on a rainy road outside our town, and just like that, I was the only thing standing between my 6-year-old brother Caleb and an empty house. There was no long family meeting. There was no one else who could take him. There was just me, a part-time job at a diner, and a boy who kept asking when Mom and Dad were coming home. I told him they weren't coming home. I told him I was staying instead. I didn't know if that was a promise I could keep, but I made it anyway, and I spent the next 15 years making sure it stayed true. I gave up college. I gave up the boyfriend who didn't want to raise someone else's kid. I gave up sleep, weekends, and most of my 20s. I worked doubles at the diner, then a warehouse job with better pay and worse hours, just so Caleb could have new shoes when his grew out, so he could play baseball, so he could go on the school trip to Washington that I paid off $5 at a time. He had deepened, even after it stopped needing me the way it used to. By the time Caleb turned 21, he had grown into someone I was proud of, smart, driven, good with people in a way I never was. He got into a solid university on a partial scholarship, and I covered the rest working nights so he wouldn't have to. I never once made him feel like he owed me. I just wanted him to have a life bigger than the one we grew up in. That was the goal. That was always the goal. I never expected a reward. I never expected recognition. What I didn't expect was to become an inconvenience. It started small. He stopped calling as often. He said he was busy, and I believed him because that's what you do when you love someone and you've spent your whole life making excuses for them. Then he started dating a woman named Vanessa, whose family had money the way some families have traditions, passed down and treated like it was owed to them. Caleb changed around her. He got quieter about where he came from. He stopped mentioning me at all. I told myself it was a phase. People grow. People shift when they fall in love. I didn't need credit for raising him. I just wanted him to be happy, and if happiness meant a little distance, I could live with that. Then came the engagement party. Vanessa's parents hosted it at a country club I couldn't have afforded to walk into, let alone attend as a guest. Caleb invited me himself, which surprised me, and for the first time in months, I felt like maybe he still saw me as family. I bought a dress I couldn't really afford and drove 2 hours to be there for him, the same way I'd shown up for every important moment of his life since he was 6 years old. If you're enjoying this story so far, let me know in the comments what you would have done in this situation. And if you enjoy original emotional revenge stories, don't forget to subscribe to Raw Revenge so you never miss our next story. The party was beautiful in the kind of way that feels rehearsed. String lights, a jazz trio, servers with trays of food I couldn't pronounce. I found a quiet corner and watched my little brother laugh with people who had never worked a single double shift in their lives. I was happy for him. I want to be clear about that. Even with everything that happened after in that moment, I was happy for him. Then Vanessa's mother approached me with a polite smile and asked how I knew the happy couple. "I'm Caleb's sister," I said. "I actually raised him." She blinked, confused, and called Caleb over to clear things up. And that's when it happened. That's when my little brother, the boy I stayed up with through fevers and nightmares, the boy whose homework I checked by flashlight because our electricity got shut off one winter, looked me in the eye in front of a crowd of strangers and said, "I'm sorry, there's some kind of mix-up. I don't think we've met." I felt the floor tilt under me, not metaphorically. I actually felt dizzy, like my body understood before my mind did that something in my life had just ended. I didn't argue. I didn't cause a scene. I said, "My mistake," and I walked out to my car and sat there for 20 minutes before I could make my hands steady enough to drive. For weeks, I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he panicked. Maybe Vanessa's family judged people by their background, and Caleb was scared of losing everything he'd built with her. I wanted to believe that more than I wanted to believe the alternative, which was that somewhere along the way, my brother had decided I was something to be ashamed of. I didn't call him. He didn't call me. Silence has a way of confirming what you're afraid of. Then, about a month later, I got a message from my cousin Renee, who still lived in our hometown and kept up with people from Caleb's old friend group. She sent me a screen recording from a live stream Vanessa's younger sister had done during the party, one of those casual behind-the-scenes videos people post for followers. In it, someone off camera asked Caleb about his family, and he said on record that he was an only child, that his parents had passed when he was young, and that Vanessa's family was the only real family he'd ever known. An only child. 15 years of my life erased in one sentence, delivered smoothly like he'd practiced it. I didn't cry when I watched it. I think I was too far past crying by then. What I felt instead was something colder and more clear-headed. I realized I had spent my entire adult life building a person who, the moment it became convenient, decided I never existed. I could have let it go. Plenty of people would have. But there was one thing Caleb didn't know I still had, tucked away in a fireproof box in my closet since the year our parents died. Our mother, before she passed, had made me promise something in writing, back when Caleb was still in elementary school, and she'd started worrying about her health. It wasn't legally binding, not really, but it was in her handwriting, signed and dated, asking me to make sure Caleb never forgot where he came from, and thanking me in advance for the sacrifice she already knew I'd be making. Alongside it were the actual legal guardianship documents from when I formally took custody of him at 18, once I turned old enough for the court to approve it. Names, dates, signatures. Proof, in the most literal sense, that I hadn't just claimed to raise him. I had legally been responsible for him for years. I hadn't planned to use any of it. I kept it because it mattered to me, not because I thought I'd ever need to prove my own life to anyone. But now I had a decision to make. The wedding was 3 months away. Vanessa's family, I learned through Renee, was hosting a large engagement dinner before the actual ceremony, the kind of event where toasts get made and photos get taken, and 100 people from both families gather in one room. Caleb hadn't invited me, which told me everything about where I stood. But Renee had been invited as a +1 through an old family friend, and she offered to bring me. I said yes. I want to be honest about something. I didn't go there to destroy my brother's wedding. I went there because I needed him to look me in the eye one more time and understand what he had thrown away, and because some small, stubborn part of me still hoped there was a version of him left that would be horrified by what he'd done. The dinner was even grander than the engagement party. Caleb stood at the front of the room during the toasts, polished and confident, thanking Vanessa's parents for welcoming him into a real family. I watched him say it without flinching, and something in me went very still and very calm. When the toasts ended and the room settled into quiet conversation, I walked to the front, and I asked if I could say a few words. Nobody there knew who I was, so nobody stopped me. Vanessa's father, ever the gracious host, handed me the microphone with a smile, assuming I was some relative of the groom's side. I kept my voice steady. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth. I said that 15 years ago, a 17-year-old girl became legally responsible for a 6-year-old boy after their parents died in an accident. I said she worked 2 jobs through her 20s, so he could go to school with new shoes and a lunch that wasn't embarrassing. I said she paid for his class trip, cossined his first apartment, and sat in the hospital waiting room the night he broke his arm falling off his bike, because there was no one else to sit there. I said she never asked for gratitude, never asked to be paid back, and never once imagined that the boy she raised would stand in a room full of strangers and call himself an only child. Then I set the folder of documents on the table in front of Caleb, guardianship papers, our mother's letter, A photo of the two of us on his first day of middle school, him grinning with a gap in his teeth, me exhausted and 22 and still showing up. I didn't need to say who I was. The room did the math on its own, and I watched every ounce of composure drain out of my brother's face. Vanessa's mother looked at him and asked, quietly but not quietly enough, if any of it was true. Caleb opened his mouth, and nothing came out. For the first time in longer than I could remember, my little brother had absolutely nothing to say. I didn't stay to watch what happened after that. I handed the microphone back, thanked the host for her hospitality, and left with Renee. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't need to. The truth had already done that for me. The wedding was postponed. I heard through Renee, weeks later, that Vanessa needed time to think about marrying someone who could erase the person responsible for his entire life without hesitation, and that her family had a lot of uncomfortable questions about what else Caleb might be capable of rewriting when it suited him. Caleb reached out to me almost 2 months after the dinner, not with an excuse this time, with an apology, the kind that actually acknowledges what was done instead of explaining it away. He said he'd been so afraid of being seen as less than the people he was trying to belong with that he'd been willing to erase the one person who made sure he survived long enough to belong anywhere. He said he hated the version of himself that stood in that room and pretended not to know me, and that hating it didn't undo it, but he needed me to know he saw it clearly now. I didn't forgive him instantly. I want to be honest about that too, because I think pretending forgiveness is easy does a disservice to anyone listening who has been through something similar. It took months of him actually showing up, actually calling, actually being present in the ordinary, unglamorous way that matters more than any single grand gesture. Slowly, carefully, we found our way back to something that felt like family again. Not the family we used to have, but a new one, built on honesty this time instead of survival. Vanessa and Caleb did eventually get married, almost a year later than planned, in a much smaller ceremony. I sat in the front row. He introduced me to every single guest himself, by name, by relationship, with pride instead of shame. During his own toast, he told the true story, the whole story about the sister who raised him. He didn't leave anything out this time. I think about that engagement dinner sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a strange kind of gratitude. It forced a reckoning that might never have happened otherwise. It's easy to keep giving to someone quietly for years, expecting nothing, until the day you realize your silence has let them forget the cost of what you gave. Sometimes the people we love the most need to see the truth laid out plainly before they understand what they almost lost. I didn't raise my brother so he would owe me anything. I raised him because it was right, because I loved him, because someone had to. But love without truth can be erased too easily. What I learned, in the hardest way possible, is that the people who matter most deserve to be spoken about honestly, even when honesty is inconvenient, even when it costs you a room full of approval from people who never once stayed up all night for you. If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy original emotional revenge stories about courage, dignity, and justice, subscribe to Raw Revenge for more powerful stories every week. This is an original fictional story created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.